Thank you for joining us for another episode of Edmonton Real Estate Today, where we help you care for your home and maximize the return on your investment. In today's episode, I have joining me Melanie Bowles of Remax Real Estate and Cheryl Stevens, also of Remax Real Estate. So welcome, Melanie and Cheryl.
Good morning, Leroy.
Good morning, Leroy.
Well, what a year we've had so far in 2020. If you guys had to describe the year so far in one or two words, what would you say?
I would say non-traditional. It definitely has not been a traditional market.
And I would say unpredictable, because what we thought it was going to be is not at all what it was, but yet it was also not as bad as it could have been, right?
Agreed.
Well, let's talk about what the market has been doing so far this year. The Real Estate Association of Edmonton has released the stats showing that the average price for a single-family home has been $439,000. Condos are at $231,000, and duplexes at $338,000. Now, the days that it's taking for these to sell, it shows that single-family homes have been taking 49, condos 63, and duplexes 54 days to sell. Now, if I'm a home buyer listening to this program, what would days on market really mean to them as a home buyer?
As a home buyer, days on market is a good starting point to think about the market, but I don't think it's the be-all, end-all of the stats that we have. Days on market allows us at a quick glance to tell how busy the market is and how fast, as a buyer, we may have to make decisions. The other thing as a buyer, you may be able to gauge by days on market is the amount of room to negotiate on a price. As a buyer, you may also be able to have an understanding of the seller's motivation. Long days on market could indicate a seller who is maybe not as willing to negotiate. Lots of factors to take into account. And I think so important as a buyer to have a realtor help you understand all the information and all the statistics that are available to you.
And I would totally agree with you, Melanie. And I know that's where if the house has been sitting on the market a long time, I'll make sure I actually get a hold of the actual listing agent, find out, maybe have they had offers, because you can at least, they can't tell us what the offers were, but they can tell us if they've had action. So if, for example, they've actually had offers, they haven't come together, that would be that indication of the seller being a little stuck on his price, right? But it also gives us a sense if he hasn't had any interest, then they may be a little overpriced. So that also tells the buyer that they're a little high in the marketplace, right? So it gives you a sense of negotiation power, but it also, the other thing I find is it really, as a buyer's agent, it makes you go in and be a little more, what would be the word, skeptical of the property, because you end up being with the buyer going, what's wrong with this property? Why has nobody else grabbed it up? So it kind of just sets the tone, right?
Guys, so on the other side of the coin, when we're talking from a home seller's perspective, what would days on market mean to a home seller?
As a seller, days on market could indicate that you have maybe priced yourself out of range in the market if you see that days on market number start to creep up. True market value, of course, I think is determined by what a buyer is willing to pay in the market that we're in. And if we see that number start to creep up to the average and higher than the average without seeing any offers, you may have to think about adjusting your price and maybe getting more into range with what the market has done. Days on market can also help you set your timing. Looking at trends month over month, if we see days on market start to come downwards, sellers may consider waiting for the market to tighten up a little bit, since if competition will likely start to heat up at that time, allowing you maybe to achieve a greater value. Conversely, if it is going up, they may want to hurry and get on the market before we see supplies start to increase and the market become more saturated, which therefore would maybe be more challenging to sell. Watching days on market, I think strategically, allows us to watch the swing between the buyer's market, the balanced market, and a seller's market.
You know what? It's one thing about setting your price with your realtor, making sure that you look at all the stats, so that you can make sure that you're the one setting your price because you've actually analyzed the whole situation instead of having your neighbors force your hand. Because one thing you don't realize is sometimes the sellers will say, well, I want X for my property. But the problem is if the neighbors are way more motivated and they keep dropping their prices to get their house sold, that now actually affects your price point, because as that next buyer comes in and maybe you're listed at 400 and the buyer's going, but every other house on your block sold for 360, whether you think you're going to get 400, I, as a buyer, I'm going to go, well, no, everything's selling for 360, so your house is for 360. So I think it's really important to discuss all those things with your agent to make sure you're setting your price and your neighbors aren't forcing your hand.
Is there a more meaningful number that me as a home buyer out there, I should be looking at when I'm looking at how long a property's been on the market?
I think as a home buyer, you should be looking at the market as a whole with your agent. You really need to strategize the best way to get the most house for the best value. Looking at cumulative days on market is more important than basic days on market, as sometimes properties get listed, they expired, the agent terminates, relists. And so I think therefore the most important number becomes the cumulative or running days on market. That gives you a clear picture of what the total days on market looks like and actually allows you to better gauge the market.
Oh, for sure. And I don't think I could have said it any better, Melanie. The only thing I would just always remind the sellers is, again, we really need to look at, again, what the neighborhood is selling for, right?
What numbers should a home seller be focused on because we're thinking, hey, how long is it going to take me to sell my home? What should we be looking at as a home seller?
As a seller, you have to look at things a little bit differently. I think you have to really consider the inventory level that you are competing against and how you would fit into that inventory level. When I sit down with my sellers, I always look at active listings in their particular neighborhood or area, and then drill down through the active listings into their price range, which we've established by doing a market evaluation, looking at the home style, etc., all of the things we take into consideration, and then determine how you're going to compete within your area. As most buyers will pick a location first and then fit into their requirements what their housing needs are. So I think as a seller, you need to make sure you are competitive within your area, and you can then use maybe the days on market stat to determine how aggressive you can be with your pricing and how you want to fit into that inventory in your neighborhood.
No, for sure. And I think that you really hit the nail on the head when talking about, drilling down into the marketplace. I don't think we talk enough about how many of the homes were actually, expired and terminated, because I think sellers just very much look at, oh, well, John down the street sold for this, or, the other one around the corner sold for that. I think we need to remind them that, again, not every house on the market sells. And so it's really important to look at, okay, what is actually selling, but what's actually coming off the market too, because if, for example, that seller is thinking of listing again at 400, but we notice the other three guys that have actually come off the market, they've maybe expired or they've terminated, they were all at 400, couldn't sell, then we know 400 is too high. And we definitely don't want to be in the market testing it these days. If you really want to sell, you're going to have to price it accordingly to make sure that it actually gets sold, especially in the winter months when there's not as many buyers out there.
So the Real Estate Association reported new listings at 1858 for November 2020. Sales are 1399, and inventory ended at 6205. Now, with the new restrictions and, winter, we're in the midst of winter, how do you see these factors affecting home buyers and sellers in the marketplace?
There's lots of things that have been unpredictable, but the key is that if a seller wants to sell, he also, again, it's important to get on the marketplace. I find I've got buyers out there right now that we just can't find the house for them because we're low in inventory. And so it's really important to know that if you're serious about selling, talk to your realtor, get your home listed, because the buyers that are out there are actually serious about buying. We don't really have anybody in this marketplace right now just kind of testing the waters, be it on the buyer side or the seller side, because the ones that are out there can, number one, afford it. They've already been pre-approved, and the sellers are actually motivated because not many people want to actually sell in the winter. So if it's going to be on the market, they're serious.
I think that's a good way to sum up what our winter market is going to look like. I'm not sure that the further restrictions that we've seen come into place will affect the market any more than our normal winter slowdown and what we have already seen with the challenges of 2020. I think we've adapted to the changes, and even though they are changing daily, I think it's just what our new normal is. So I think that people that are still motivated to sell or buy will take advantage of the low interest rates. And I agree with you, as we've seen the inventory come down and the sales to listing ratio increase, it's driving us more towards that balanced market. And I think I agree, if you're motivated to sell or to buy, I don't think there's a better time to do it, because you can take advantage of people that are in the same mindset as you and take advantage of the interest rate.